Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
A quiet suburban neighborhood in northern Ohio was the last place anyone would expect something sinister to happen. But in early September of 2017, a man named Charlie stumbled into something dark. Something that started with an innocent Saturday morning yard sale. Charlie had just moved into the area a few months earlier and was still settling into his fixer-upper. It was one of those sleepy neighborhoods where everyone smiled too politely and waved a little too eagerly. On that morning, he spotted neon poster board signs with arrows pointing down the street and a simple message in black marker: estate sale, everything must go. He followed them out of curiosity. The house was an old colonial tucked behind overgrown hedges, with flaking white paint and an eerily quiet air despite the people milling around the lawn and garage. Everything seemed normal at first. Tables of books, dishes, furniture, a few vintage dolls. A frail old woman in a gray shawl sat near the door, watching the visitors with distant, cloudy eyes. She never spoke, just sat there with her bony hands folded, staring. Charlie wandered inside the house where things got a little off. There were dozens of clocks all over the walls and shelves, none of them ticking. Some were ancient and ornate, others cheap and plastic. Every single one was stopped at 3:19. He mentioned it to the middle-aged woman running the sale, who introduced herself as Lena, the niece of the homeowner. She just smiled tightly and said, "They always stop at the same time." Nobody ever figured out why. In the back room, Charlie found something that caught his attention: a vintage wooden box, hand-carved with rusted metal hinges. No price tag. It was heavy, sealed with a corroded latch. He picked it up and asked Lena about it. She looked at it and hesitated. "It belonged to my uncle. He was odd, obsessed with old rituals, collected strange things. Honestly, I'd rather it be gone." "How much?" Charlie asked. She shrugged. $10. But once it's yours. No returns." He bought it. That night, Charlie brought the box home and left it on the dining room table. He figured he'd open it the next day. But at exactly 3:19 a.m., he woke up choking on air. His room felt like ice, and he could hear something, like scratching, faint but insistent, not from the walls, from inside the house. He got up and followed the noise downstairs. The scratching was coming from the box. His heart pounded. The latch that had been stuck shut now hung open. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside was nothing, just black, decaying velvet lining and a smell like damp soil. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. In the dark, he heard movement behind him, shuffling feet, slow breathing. He turned, but there was nothing. Then the clocks, all of them, began ticking. From every room, in perfect unison. And then they all stopped at 3:19. That's when the whispering started. He couldn't understand the words, but it was close, too close, like breath on his neck. He turned again, and for a moment, just a split second, he saw a figure in the hallway mirror. Tall, thin, head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes black and leaking something dark down its cheeks. Then it was gone. The next morning, Charlie tried to return the box, but the house was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The grass was dead. The windows were boarded up. Neighbors claimed no one had lived there in years. When he described Lena, the old woman, the yard sale, no one remembered it happening. In fact, they insisted the house had been condemned since 2012 after a murder-suicide involving a man who had become obsessed with capturing time. Desperate, Charlie tried to destroy the box, burn it, bury it, drown it. Nothing worked. It always came back, sitting quietly on his kitchen table, ticking softly now, just once a night, always at 3:19. He doesn't sleep anymore. Cameras never capture the things he sees. Every night the ticking starts, and each time that whispering gets louder, closer. The last thing he ever posted online was a photo of the box with the caption, "If you ever find this at a yard sale, don't open it, don't even touch it. It doesn't want to leave you, it just wants time to stop." That post is still up. Comments have been disabled. The profile hasn't been active since.
Story number 2.
It was supposed to be an ordinary family reunion in the small rural town of Grafton, West Virginia. The kind of place you hear about but never visit, tucked away in the mountains, where neighbors still knew each other's names and everyone had lived there for generations. The kind of town that hadn't changed in decades. But something was about to disturb the quiet routine of the town, and it began with an innocuous phone call. Caitlin, a 20-something woman from the city, had never been particularly close to her extended family. But when her aunt called and insisted she come for the reunion, Caitlin reluctantly agreed. "It'll be good to see everyone," her aunt said. "It's a family tradition, you know." Caitlin arrived on a Friday evening, driving through winding, empty roads and past silent farms. She was immediately struck by how old everything looked. The houses seemed stuck in time, as if the clock hadn't ticked in decades. No one waved as she drove past, and it felt like she was being watched, though no one was around. The reunion was held at her aunt's house, a creaky Victorian-style home perched on a hill. It was much larger than Caitlin had expected, with a sprawling yard and a forest that began just beyond the property line. She greeted her relatives, but something felt off. They all seemed distant, their eyes darting around nervously, and they spoke in a way that made Caitlin uneasy. She tried to brush it off. It was a small town. Maybe the people were just a little more reserved. But as the night wore on, things started to get strange. After dinner, Caitlin excused herself to explore the house. The inside was dark, lit only by dim lamps and the occasional flicker of an old ceiling fan. As she wandered through the rooms, she came across a locked door at the end of the hall. Curiosity piqued. She found an old key hanging on a hook nearby and unlocked it. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down into a basement that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Caitlin hesitated for a moment, but the urge to explore was too strong. She descended carefully, the air thick with dust. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the smell of damp wood and mildew hit her immediately. But there was something else too, a smell she couldn't place, almost metallic. At the far end of the basement, Caitlin saw a small table with something wrapped in cloth. She walked toward it, her heart beating faster with each step. She reached out to pull the cloth away, and as soon as her fingers touched it, the ground beneath her shook. The lights flickered. Caitlin froze, her breath catching in her throat. And then, as the cloth came loose, she screamed. Underneath was a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. And inside the box, beneath a layer of old, brittle parchment, was a collection of black and white photographs. They were of people she didn't recognize at first, but then, as she looked closer, she saw something chilling. In every photograph, there was a man standing in the background. His face was obscured, but his eyes were unmistakable. They were always the same. Dark, hollow, empty. A voice behind her whispered, "You shouldn't have opened it." She spun around to find her aunt, standing in the doorway with a terrified look on her face. "You don't know what you've done," her aunt said, her voice trembling. "We thought it was gone. We thought it was over." Caitlin tried to speak, but her throat went dry. "What do you mean? What is this?" The silence in the basement was suffocating. Her aunt took a deep breath. "That man in the photographs, he's no man at all. He's something much older, a thing. A creature that's been following our family for generations. We thought we'd gotten rid of it, but it's been waiting for the right moment to return." Her aunt's eyes welled up with tears. "When you opened that box, you freed it." Before Caitlin could react, a loud bang echoed through the house, followed by a low, guttural growl. The lights flickered again, and the temperature in the basement plummeted. Her aunt grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the stairs. "We have to get out of here now. It's already here." They ran up the stairs, but when they reached the top, the hallway had changed. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, and shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. The house creaked, and distant footsteps echoed from somewhere upstairs, though Caitlin was sure no one else was there. Her aunt screamed, pointing toward the window. Through the glass, Caitlin saw it, the figure from the photographs, standing in the yard, its black eyes staring directly at her. It wasn't a man at all. It was something far darker, with long, twisted limbs and a face that seemed to shift and change with every blink. The lights went out, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature vanished. Caitlin's aunt collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's come for us again," she whispered. They never left the house that night. In fact, Caitlin never saw her aunt again after that evening. When she returned to the town a few weeks later, the house was gone. Just an empty lot with nothing left but a patch of overgrown grass. No one in Grafton ever spoke of the family reunion again, and Caitlin was never able to bring herself to go back. But sometimes when she's alone in her apartment, she hears something outside her window, something with hollow eyes, waiting for her to make the same mistake.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be an easy summer job. Max had just graduated from college and was desperate to make some extra cash before heading into the real world. So when his friend Noah told him about a job in a small town just outside of the city, Max didn't hesitate. The job was simple enough, helping clear out an old mansion that had been abandoned for years. The pay was good, and the town seemed quiet and peaceful. Max figured it would be a nice way to spend a few weeks before he had to face the grind of life. The mansion, located at the edge of the town of Elmsworth, looked like something straight out of a Gothic novel. Towering and imposing, it had been built in the early 1800s, and the locals talked about it like it was haunted. Max hadn't given it much thought. He'd been told that the owner, a reclusive man named Charles Livingston, had passed away, and now the place needed to be cleared out so it could be sold. Noah worked as the foreman on the project and had assured Max that it was all above board. When Max arrived at the mansion, it was even more intimidating than he had imagined. The wrought iron gate squealed as it opened, revealing a large, overgrown yard. The mansion stood at the far end, its windows dark and the stone facade cracked and weathered by years of neglect. Max felt a chill in the air, but he chalked it up to the late afternoon breeze. He was here to work, not to get spooked. Inside, the mansion was dusty, filled with layers of cobwebs and furniture draped in old sheets. The smell of mildew and decay was strong, but Max didn't mind. It wasn't the first time he'd been in an old building. He made his way to the back of the house where Noah was waiting. "Glad you could make it," Noah said with a grin, but there was something in his eyes, a nervousness that Max couldn't quite place. "Let's get started." For the first few days, the work was routine. They cleared out old furniture, boxes of papers, and forgotten relics from past generations. But as they made their way deeper into the house, Max began to notice strange things. The house felt like it was alive, almost as if it were watching them. The air was thick with a sense of unease, and sometimes, when Max would glance over his shoulder, he swore he saw shadows moving in the corners of his vision. On the 4th day, Max discovered the library. It was tucked away on the 2nd floor, hidden behind a set of heavy wooden doors that seemed to resist his attempts to open them. When he finally forced the door open, he found shelves lined with ancient books, their pages yellowed with age. A large desk sat in the center of the room, covered in dust and papers. But what caught Max's attention was the painting on the wall. It was a portrait of a man, Charles Livingston, he assumed. The man in the painting had a sharp, calculating look in his eyes, and his face seemed to follow Max as he moved around the room. But what was most unsettling were the scratches. Long, deep gouges marred the surface of the painting, as though something had tried to claw its way through it. Max's curiosity got the better of him, and he pulled the painting off the wall, revealing a small, hidden door behind it. The door was made of iron, rusted with age, and locked with a heavy padlock. Max tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. There was something about the door that intrigued him, something that made him feel like he had to get inside. The next day, after Noah had left for the evening, Max returned to the library. He was alone now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He went straight for the hidden door, and to his surprise, the padlock was gone. It was as though it had been removed overnight. With his heart pounding, Max opened the door and stepped inside. The room beyond was pitch dark, the air stale and cold. He fumbled for a light switch, but when he found one, the light revealed something he hadn't expected. The room was filled with mirrors, tall, ornate mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling. They were all framed in gold, their surfaces gleaming despite the years of neglect. But what made Max's stomach turn was the reflection in the mirrors. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but the mirrors seemed to show things that weren't there. A shadowy figure in the corner, moving just out of his line of sight, the reflection of himself, but with something wrong. His eyes were darker, deeper, as though something had crawled inside him. He turned to leave, but as he moved toward the door, the reflections in the mirrors began to change. They warped and shifted, and in one of them, he saw Noah, standing in the corner, grinning, his face twisted in a way that was nothing like the Noah Max knew. The reflection of Noah reached out, its fingers stretching unnaturally toward him. Max stumbled back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He turned and bolted for the door, but as he ran, the mirrors seemed to close in on him, their surfaces rippling like water. He could hear whispers, low and urgent, coming from the glass. Max didn't stop running until he was outside, gasping for air. The next day, he couldn't find Noah. He searched the mansion, calling out his friend's name, but there was no answer. The house felt even more oppressive now, as though it had swallowed Noah whole. Max left the mansion and never returned. He tried to tell the authorities about what had happened, but when they went to investigate, the mansion was gone. No sign of the building, no trace of the yard, just an empty field where it had once stood. Max hasn't spoken to anyone about what happened. But sometimes, when he's alone at night, he sees his reflection in the dark glass of a window or a mirror. And sometimes, just sometimes, he swears he sees Noah standing behind him, grinning, just as he had in the mirror, his fingers stretching toward Max's back.
Story number 4.
It was a warm autumn evening when Clara found herself driving along the back roads, hoping to reach her destination before nightfall. She had recently relocated to a quiet town in the mountains after her job transfer, and her new house was situated on the outskirts, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills. Clara, though still unfamiliar with her new surroundings, had heard the locals speak of an old inn nearby. An inn that had been abandoned for years, but was said to have a certain reputation. It wasn't until a heavy rainstorm delayed her trip that Clara found herself driving down the narrow, winding road that led to the inn. She hadn't planned to stop, but when her car began sputtering and the rain intensified, she had no choice but to pull into the inn's gravel driveway. The building loomed ahead, its faded wooden sign creaking in the wind. The Hollow Springs Inn. The inn looked as though it had been frozen in time. Its once grand facade was covered in ivy, the windows were dark, and the roof sagged under years of neglect. But Clara was desperate for shelter, and the thought of continuing her drive in the storm was too much to bear. So she pulled her car into the parking lot, grabbed her bag, and went inside. The door creaked as she entered, and she was immediately greeted by a damp, musty smell. The lobby was dimly lit, with old wallpaper peeling off the walls. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Behind the front desk stood an elderly woman, her eyes sharp and cold. She gave Clara a long, assessing look before speaking in a voice that was raspy but calm. "Welcome to the Hollow Springs Inn. How can I help you?" Clara explained that she was just passing through and needed a room for the night. The woman nodded and handed her an old-fashioned brass key. "Room 5, she said, her voice flat. "But be warned, people say this place is cursed." Clara smiled politely, assuming the woman was just telling a local legend to spook newcomers, and took the key. She didn't ask what the curse was, figuring it was just one of those stories meant to give the inn a sense of mystery. She made her way to the stairs, but something felt off. The air seemed thicker here, the house itself exhaling an eerie chill as she ascended. Room 5 was at the end of a narrow hallway, the door slightly ajar. Clara stepped inside and immediately felt the temperature drop. The room was old, furnished with antique furniture covered in faded sheets. A large 4-poster bed sat against the wall, its posts carved with strange symbols that Clara couldn't quite make out in the dim light. The only other feature of note was the large, cracked mirror hanging above a dresser across from the bed. As she unpacked, Clara noticed that the air in the room was growing colder, almost unbearable. She wrapped herself in a blanket, hoping to ignore it. But soon a strange unease began to settle over her. The silence of the inn was suffocating. There were no sounds of wind outside, no birds, no passing cars, only an oppressive stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. As the night wore on, Clara began to hear faint noises, whispers, like soft voices coming from the other side of the walls. She shook it off at first, thinking it was just the house settling. But then the whispers grew louder, and they sounded closer. She could almost make out words, but they were too indistinct to understand. Clara's heart raced, and she tried to tell herself it was just her imagination. She sat up in bed, clutching the blanket tightly, when suddenly the door to the room slammed shut. The noise echoed through the hallway, and Clara felt a sudden surge of panic. She jumped out of bed, her hands shaking as she tried to open the door. It was stuck. No matter how hard she pulled, it wouldn't budge. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl, like the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor just outside her room. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. Clara pressed her ear against the door, her breath shallow, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped, and there was a long pause, then a knock on the door. Clara's heart stopped. The knocking was soft at first, then louder, as though someone or something was growing impatient. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. The whisper started again, now clearer and more insistent. "You shouldn't have stayed. It's too late now." Clara stumbled back from the door, her body frozen in terror. The room grew colder still, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to shift, stretching unnaturally across the walls. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the temperature in the room plummeted, and she could feel the presence of something watching her. Something ancient, something angry. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone to call for help, but the screen flickered and went black before she could dial. The lights in the room flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. In the pitch black, Clara heard it again, the growl, now much louder, accompanied by the sound of scratching claws on the floor. Panicked, Clara grabbed the key, but as she tried to leave, the door wouldn't open. It was as if someone, was holding it shut from the outside. Then she saw it. In the reflection of the cracked mirror, a figure appeared behind her. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, but then it began to take shape. A tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The figure's mouth opened, and a voice filled the room, low and slithering. "You should never have stayed, little one." Clara screamed and backed away from the mirror, but the figure stepped closer, its form becoming clearer, more defined. The growl grew louder, filling her ears as her surroundings began to distort. The walls warped, the shadows grew longer, and the mirror reflected things that didn't belong to this world. In the end, the room was empty again. The inn was silent. But the next morning, when the elderly woman at the front desk was asked about Clara, she simply shook her head, her face unreadable. "She never left," the woman murmured. When the storm finally cleared, the inn was still there, standing silent and unmoving, just as it had been for years.
Story number 5.
In the small town of Kingsbridge, nestled deep in the hills, there was a peculiar shop that only appeared at midnight. It wasn't there during the day, and no one had ever seen the owner, but for those who knew where to look, it would be there, standing at the corner of the old cobblestone street. The Lost Curiosity Shop. Jenna had heard whispers about the shop ever since she moved to Kingsbridge. People spoke of it like it was a ghost, a place that existed only in the shadows of the town's history. Some claimed it was a place where you could buy forgotten memories or items from your past that you didn't even know you were missing. Others believed it was a place where the broken, the lost, and the damned came to make strange bargains. Most of the townsfolk would simply shrug it off as a local legend, but curiosity gnawed at Jenna. On a particularly quiet night, she decided to go looking for it. She walked the winding streets, glancing down every alley and past every dark corner. She'd walked these streets countless times before, but tonight they felt different, darker somehow, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The cold air seemed to press against her skin, and the only sound was the soft shuffle of her boots against the pavement. And then she saw it. The shop was old, like something out of a dream. Its windows were dimly lit, filled with shelves of strange objects that caught her eye. Antique books with cracked leather covers, tarnished trinkets, and faded photographs. A dusty bell above the door rang softly as she pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit interior. The shop was small, but there were rows upon rows of items, none of which she recognized. The smell of aged wood and incense hung in the air, and the shelves creaked with the weight of things that had been left behind. As her eyes adjusted to the low light, Jenna saw the counter at the back of the shop, where a figure sat behind a thick veil of mist. The person was hunched over, their face obscured by shadow. "Can I help you?" The voice came, smooth and deep, like it belonged to someone who had seen centuries pass. Jenna hesitated, but her curiosity pushed her forward. I was just looking. I didn't know this place existed." The figure didn't respond right away. Instead, the mist parted slightly, revealing an old man with a face that was almost too pale, his eyes gleaming unnaturally bright in the gloom. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It exists only for those who seek it," he said cryptically. "You found it, and now you must decide what you're willing to pay for what you want." Jenna didn't understand at first, but then her eyes were drawn to a small, weathered box on one of the shelves. It was intricately carved, its edges frayed with age, but something about it called to her. She stepped closer, her fingers almost trembling as she picked it up. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The old man's smile grew wider. "Ah, you've chosen interesting." Jenna opened the box, and as soon as she did, a flash of memories flooded her mind. She saw herself as a child, running through the fields behind her childhood home, laughing with friends she hadn't thought of in years. But the memories weren't just happy ones. They were tinged with sadness and something dark, the death of her mother, the loneliness she had never been able to shake. And as quickly as it came, it all vanished, leaving Jenna gasping for breath. "What was that?" she whispered, looking up at the old man. "Memories. Forgotten, hidden away," he said softly. "That box contains what you lost, things you didn't even realize you had forgotten. But be careful, my dear. Some things are better left buried." Jenna felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" The old man's eyes flashed, his voice low. "Once you take something from here, you must leave something in return. A piece of yourself, a memory, a regret, something precious." Jenna's heart began to race. "What happens if I don't?" The shop seemed to grow colder, the shadows pressing closer around her. She could feel the walls, the floor, everything closing in. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet menace. "Then you'll never leave," he said, his voice a harsh whisper that echoed in the room. "The shop doesn't let go of those who try to cheat it." Terrified, Jenna set the box down quickly, her fingers trembling. But it was too late. The moment she released it, she felt an unnatural pull on her mind, a whisper that filled her thoughts. "You've taken what wasn't yours. Now, you'll never be free." The old man's laugh echoed in the room, but it wasn't a laugh at all. It was a chorus of voices, each one twisted, distorted, and hollow. Jenna turned and bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. She tried again, but the door was sealed. The air grew thicker, and the shadows began to move, swirling around her like dark tendrils. She screamed, banging on the door with all her strength, but no one came. From behind her, the old man's voice whispered again. "You took what was never meant to be yours. Now you'll stay here, in this place, forever." And then, as if it had never been, the shop disappeared, leaving only an empty street, the echoes of Jenna's screams lingering in the air. The next day, no one could find the shop. The street was empty, the cobblestones silent in the daylight. The townspeople said that it had never existed. But there were rumors, whispers of a woman who came looking for the lost curiosity shop. A woman who had vanished into thin air, as if she had never been there at all. But if you walk the streets of Kingsbridge at midnight, might just see it again. And if you do, you'll hear the faintest sound. Someone or something whispering your name from inside.